God's command being disobeyed, and blessing and curse. What is God commanding Adam? Why did God command Adam not to eat of the fruit of that tree? I believe that this commandment that prohibited him eating that fruit was intended to teach Adam the primacy and the importance of obedience to the commands of God. I think it had nothing to do with the actual physical fruit of that tree. I don't think there was anything wrong with the physical fruit of that tree. You remember, and this lesson is so vital throughout Scripture. You remember when God told King Saul to go and to destroy the Amalekites. And He told him to utterly destroy them, even to destroy their livestock. Completely do away with it. So Saul goes in there and he wages war. God gives them the victory. But what did Saul do? He kept some of the best livestock. Of course, he was going to put that in the national treasury of Israel, was what he was going to do. But then Samuel confronts him, and you're all familiar with the story. He confronts him, and he says, Saul, I thought God commanded you through me to completely destroy the Amalekites. And Saul said, yes, sir, that's exactly what we did. But Samuel said, wait a minute, what is the bleating of the sheep and the lowing of the oxen that I hear? You remember that story? And Saul says, we saved some of the very best of the livestock that we could do what? Make sacrifice unto God. Now, aside from him being dishonest, what was the fundamental problem there? He had disobeyed God. Do you remember what Samuel told him? Samuel told him, behold, to obey is better and more pleasing to God than any sacrifice that you could ever possibly offer Him. To obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. Now, to get the full weight of what Samuel is saying there, you need to go back and look at the emphasis that God placed on the Old Testament sacrifices and how pleasing an aroma He told them that those sacrifices would be in His sight if they executed them according to His will. But Samuel says here, obedience to God is more pleasing to Him than any sacrifice that you can offer Him. So I believe this morning, as we look at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, with the prohibition that God gave for Adam not to eat of it, I believe that this was an objective lesson to instruct Adam in the importance of obedience to God's command. This was an object lesson, if you will. He was teaching and training Adam as his priest king in the earth to be obedient to the sovereign king of heaven and earth. That was the point of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And in relation to these two trees, God gives Adam first a permissive injunction. He says, you shall surely eat of every tree of the garden. You shall surely eat of every tree of the garden. I want us to notice, first of all, the largeness of what God is permitting Adam to do. When He says that you may freely or surely eat of every tree, as Dan alluded to in his prayer this morning, that he was being given permission, Justin, to completely satisfy himself there in the garden. To eat until his heart was full and content before his God. If you remember Genesis 1:29, God has already told Adam, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit, and you shall have them for food. Adam was permitted to partake of everything in the garden, I believe, up to and including the tree of life. And the injunctive here is to not just partake of it, not partake of it grudgingly or sparingly, but to fill himself to contentment upon that which God had given him. There's a largeness in what God is communicating to Adam here. There's a lavishness. There's an extravagance. There's an abundance here. Adam is being given liberty to enjoy everything necessary for his contentment. Is that a concept that we ever see again in Scripture? One of the first verses that springs to my mind is in Romans chapter 8, and probably most of you could quote this. But in Romans chapter 8, the Apostle Paul says, God did not spare His own Son, but gave Him up for us all. How will He not also with Him, what? Graciously give us all things. You see, in the garden, Adam was given everything that was necessary for his contentment. He was given every plant, every bush, every seed, every vegetable, everything that was necessary, including the tree of life, which was representative of Christ's presence with Adam there in the garden. Adam was given all of that. There was nothing lacking for Adam's satisfaction in the garden. So we see our next point, that there was a largeness and liberty in God's permissive injunction to Adam, which injunction granted him permission to enjoy a lavish and abundant life. God was not miserly, was He? He was giving to Adam in a large way. But then there is a prohibitive element to God's command here in chapter 2, verse 17. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. You shall not eat. Now that seems to almost, does it not, stand in stark contrast to the largeness of what God was permitting Adam to do. I mean, He's saying you can eat of everything except this one tree. Everything except this one tree. But I think what we need to understand, what we have to understand here, is that God's prohibition here in no way means that man was deprived of anything. We have a tendency to look at God's prohibitive commandments when He says, "Thou shalt not." Do we not have a tendency to look at those as if He is withholding some good thing from us? In our carnality, and you can nod your head up and down yes, because that is what you think. In our fallenness, that's what we think. Somehow we're having something withheld from us that would be good for us. But Adam was not having anything withheld from him in not being able to eat of the fruit of that tree. He was not having anything withheld from him that was good. In actuality, when we understand that that tree was there to teach Adam the spiritual lesson of obedience to his Creator, we begin to understand that that tree actually, and the prohibition attached with that tree, actually enlarged Adam's potential. Did it not? Because Adam is by this commandment identified as the only creature in God's creation that can hear the moral commands of God and obey the moral commands of God. The only creature in all of creation. And God is taking this one tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and He's teaching Adam obedience through that tree. And Adam is not missing out on anything. He's being taught obedience to his Creator. I believe what this prohibition this command by God is doing, it's confronting both Adam and us with the absolute rule and authority of God in His creation. He created it. He sets the commands and the laws.